is a TaxCast special feature from the Tax Justice Network. For our monthly TaxCasts, with news, features and expert analysis you won't hear anywhere else, go to www.tackletaxhavens.com/TaxCast. And you can also find us on iTunes. Whether you're an illicit arms trafficker or a supposedly legitimate government-to-government arms broker and weapons manufacturer, it seems there's nothing you like better than the secrecy that tax havens provide. This month, the TaxCast looks at tax havens and death. How secrecy kills.
There are over 550 million firearms in worldwide circulation. That's one firearm for every 12 people on the planet. The only question is, how do we arm the other 11? The real money's in actual wars.
Always in the wrong place at the right time.
No one can stop this path of blood.
The arms trafficker Victor Boot was so notorious, actor Nicolas Cage starred in a role modelled on him in the movie Lord of War, years before Boot was charged. In 2012, Boot was finally convicted and jailed in the United States for 25 years.
1. Conspiring to kill United States nationals. 2. Conspiring to kill United States officers and employees. 3. Conspiring to use and acquire anti-aircraft missiles. And 4. Conspiring to provide material support to the FARC. The so-called Merchant of Death is now a federal inmate.
Name any war-torn country you like, and Victor Boot seems to have played a part in fueling conflict there during his long and lucrative career selling weapons. Former United Nations arms trade investigator Kathy Lynn Austin tracked him for years to gather the evidence against him. Here she is on the radio show Democracy Now!
I went into Eastern Congo and Rwanda in the aftermath of the Rwandan genocide. There was a UN arms embargo in place at the time, and I was tracking and monitoring who was violating that UN sanctions regime. Victor Boot's name kept cropping up as one of the lead entrepreneurs willing to facilitate weapons into the area to both sides of the conflict.
And it's no surprise that a man like Boot was a prolific user of tax havens and the secrecy they offer to hide your identity. Stephanie Osfeld of Global Witness.
We know that at least 12 of these shell companies that he used were incorporated in the United States, in the states of Texas, Florida, and Delaware. And it's really not just Boot. He's not the only arms dealer that exploits the opacity of shell companies to sell weapons. It's been used by many arms traffickers. Slobodan Milosevic used a network of thousands of shell companies from Cyprus to provide arms for the war against Bosnia and Kosovo.
All because tax haven secrecy provides a sanctions-busting paradise. It slows investigations right down and can stop them completely, so you can make millions selling weapons anywhere you like, hide your identity through layers of anonymous shell companies, bribe officials, and obscure the identity of the end user, your final purchaser. And it's not just black market arms traders who love tax havens. British defence company BAE Systems is a big fan too. Researcher of the arms trade and offshore structures, Daniel Mackenzie.
Tanzania is a very poor sub-Saharan African country, and they have limited air force capacity. Yet BAE negotiated a deal for the Tanzanian government to buy a military radar system. Now, not only was this in breach to World Bank and IMF standards, but they also grossly inflated the cost of the system. The system should have cost $12 million, but it was raised to $40 million. It's been alleged that the extra $28 million was used to pay off officials to convince them to purchase the system. This deal operated through companies in the British Virgin Islands, Mauritius, and in Jersey.
BAE Systems also sold warplanes to Saudi Arabia in the famous Al Yamamah deal. It was described as the biggest sale ever of anything to anyone. It was underwritten by the UK's Export Credit Guarantee Department, a kind of taxpayer-funded insurance system. Daniel Mackenzie.
Saudi Arabia didn't want to originally buy planes from Britain. They wanted to buy American planes. They wanted F-15s. And it took a lot of diplomatic conversation. It took a lot of financial incentives to get the Saudi Arabian government to buy the British planes. At the beginning of the deal, the basic price of the planes were inflated by 32% to allow for an initial £600 million slush fund for commissions. But since then, police have calculated that roughly 6 billion may have been distributed in corrupt commissions. And this is out of a 46 billion deal that has been going on over the past 20 years. During the Al Yamamah deal, BAE used front companies in offshore jurisdictions such as Switzerland and in the British Virgin Islands. And the secrecy that these tax havens provided meant that BAE were able to give financial incentives to corrupt officials and also make the deal beyond any investigation.
Even when the UK's Serious Fraud Office did investigate, the British government ordered them to drop it in the interests of national security. But let's go back to Victor Boot, the merchant of death, portrayed as a purely black market arms dealer. Here's his tracker, former United Nations arms trade investigator Cathy Lynn Austin again.
I'm very happy that justice has been served in the sense that he will be put away for 25 years, so he will be taken out of the equation. I think that we can expect a lot of the world to be far more peaceful as a result, but the U.S. government hasn't come clean. I collected forensic evidence. I collected documentary evidence in the field. And even as I was bringing forward that information, I was testifying before the U.S. Congress. I was talking to U.S. State Department intelligence officials. Still, there was no action taken against Victor Boot. And that was because the U.S. government saw that his services were very valuable for national security operations. The most recent case where American officials and American private security firms were colluding with Victor Boot was during the Iraq War. During the trial and the sentencing, Victor Boot wrote to the judge basically saying, look, I've also worked for the U.S. companies. They've paid me $6 million. That's probably, by the way, just the tip of the iceberg. So why would you be convicting me when, in fact, at the time that I was providing these services for the U.S. government, it was in violation of a U.S. law, an executive order signed by President Bush at the time, and it was in violation of UN sanctions.
OK, so we know the arms trade is a dirty business, and there's a kind of blurring between the BAEs of this world, the lords of war and national security and commercial interests. The US, the UK and France are among the world's top suppliers of weapons. But surely after the 9/11 attacks, a country like the United States closed the loopholes allowing easy movement of criminal cash across borders. Well, no. The report Global Shell Games from Australia's Griffith University ranked the United States among the easiest jurisdictions in the world to form a company without revealing the identity of who actually owns and controls it. Stephanie Osfeld of Global Witness.
The ability to incorporate anonymously is a huge loophole in U.S. law, and it's also a loophole in laws around the world. It's a particular problem in the United States because we incorporate around 2 million companies each year, which is more than the rest of the world combined. And almost every state collects less identifying information from people who wish to form these companies than from people who are seeking to obtain a driver's license or register to vote. Some states require the listing of shareholders, but shareholders can often be other companies that have anonymous ownership, or they can be nominees who really serve as front people or service providers for the actual shareholder. So it's impossible to know who ultimately owns or controls American companies.
And the role played by other powerful G8 countries is also key. Daniel Mackenzie.
A company that's registered in the UK has a lot more respectability than a company that's registered in the Cayman Islands. It makes it a lot more likely that you're going to be able to get your export license. It makes it a lot more likely that you're going to be able to get your end user certificate, which is necessary for buying weapons. A company that's registered in the UK will have an address in the UK, and it might have letters with headers that suggest that the company is subject to stringent UK transfer laws. But in reality, that company might be owned by a trust in the British Virgin Islands or in Turks and Caicos or anywhere similar to that.
Cathy Lynn Austin again.
What I have been calling for in a number of other organizations is unless the arms trade treaty includes these types of intermediaries, the arms traffickers, the brokers, the transport agents, the financial agents, unless that treaty includes their activities, then we will continue to see the black market thrive.
And not only the black market. Daniel Mackenzie.
The offshore financial system facilitates corruption. Secrecy jurisdictions provide routes around regulation that is meant to save lives. The majority of the world's shipping fleet is owned by corporate vehicles registered in secrecy jurisdictions. I think the main issue is that economic structures at large, and more specifically the offshore financial structure, are not seen as security issues. And until that perception changes, we're going to have flawed international security policy.
So here's the question. The evidence on corporate secrecy is clear. Why don't governments take action? The solutions aren't rocket science. Stephanie Osfeld.
Arms traffickers and other criminals, they rely on two things to move their dirty money. That's company structures that allow them to hide their identity, and banks and other professionals like lawyers and accountants who are willing to do business with them. Every country needs to require all companies and trusts within its borders to disclose who ultimately owns and controls them. And this needs to be published in a registry that's accessible not only to law enforcement, to banks and the general public as well. And G8 countries must also put pressure on the secrecy jurisdictions with which they have relationships to adopt a similar standard.
And while our governments fail to take this simple action, the killing, the corruption, and those profiting anonymously from it goes on.
You know who's going to inherit the earth? Arms dealers. Because everyone else is too busy killing each other. That's the secret to survival.
You've been listening to a TaxCast special feature produced by me, Naomi Fowler. For the Tax Justice Network's monthly TaxCast, go to www.tackletaxhavens.com/TaxCast. For more information on the Tax Justice Network, go to www.taxjustice.net.